Right, let's put this where. Right, good morning, everybody.
Oh, good morning, Chairman. Good morning.
Welcome to the Governance and Audit Committee here at Breckland Council, Thursday, the 28th of September at 10 o'clock. You're all very welcome. So, if we could crack on, first item on the agenda is minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of June 2023. Does anybody have any comments for accuracy only on the minutes of that meeting? You're happy to agree them? Agreed. Thank you very much. I will sign a copy. It's a true and accurate record. There we go, Julie. Thank you very much. I have no matters arising that are not don't appear elsewhere on the agenda. So we move on to item 3, apologies. Julie, do we have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we have 2 apologies from Councillor Wickerson and Mr. David Fowler.
Mr. Wickerson. Any other apologies? No? Okay, thank you very much. We move on to item 4, urgent business. I have none. I've not been advised of any. So we move on to item 5, declarations of interests. Does any member have a declaration they wish to make which is not already on their statutory declaration? No? Thank you very much. Do we have any non-members wishing to address the meeting? We have none. Okay. Right, yes, so we have 2 esteemed members of Cabinet with us, Councillor Cowan and Councillor Webb, and we're very honoured to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us. So item 7, which is training, standing item. Do we have any items under 7 that anybody wants to bring up? No? Okay. So what I propose to do is to take item 11 next, because Councillor Cowan has to be somewhere else. So with the indulgence of the committee, we will move straight to item 11, annual report on debt write-offs over £10,000, which is on page 64 of your agendas. And Councillor Cowan, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks for pushing me up the agenda. It does help. Matthew's here alongside me because it's actually his report. He has the detail if anyone wishes it, but this is a report which comes to you as a result of a request that was made some time ago in a different council year, I believe. And I think it would be very interesting today to hear members' views about this particular item and how regularly we may or may not report it and in which form we may or may not report it. I'm very pleased to be able to table this report because when you look at the figures and the quantum that are included, we have business rate write-off of just under £100,000. Now, for a lot of people, £100,000 is a huge amount of money, and I don't deny that for one moment. But when you look at it in the context of the total business rate take that we take as a council, this is 0.3% of our business rates. And of course, what we also need to reflect on is that that isn't money that's lost to Breckland Council directly, because Breckland Council is merely the collecting agency for the business rates as well. So I'm very pleased to see that we've actually seen a reduction over the last couple of reporting periods. It's disappointing that we have a write-off, but unfortunately in these times that we're facing, these write-offs do occur, and they occur because people running businesses don't particularly want to not pay us business rates necessarily, but their businesses fold. And as a consequence, we're not able to reclaim any of that money. There are times when we're able to do so through the administration route, if that's in place. But in this particular case, this is liquidation, and these 2 businesses are unable to repay us. And similarly with sundry debts, what we have here is a situation where commercial property effectively that we lease goes into the owners or the renters, the lessees go into receivership, and we're unable to claim rental property income back. But again, it's a relatively small amount when you consider the context of that sum. And again, I'm delighted to be able to say it's significantly less than it was on the previous reporting period. So Matthew, as I say, sitting next to me, is the guy who draws all this information together. And I say we would be interested to hear what the committee's views are as to whether or not we should continue to report this on a quarterly basis, a 6-monthly basis, an annual basis, or report by exception, for example, when we get significant sums. Thank you. Matthew, I don't know if you wish to add anything at all.
No, happy to take questions.
So I've got Councillor Kyburd and then Councillor Monument. And then
Thank you,
Councillor Clark.
Chairman. You said that what it costs Breckland is a lot less than the actual write-off. Can you tell me what that figure is? You said that the write-off is for business rates in total, but that a lot of that doesn't come to it's cancellation of money due to the county council, etc. So what is the cost to Breckland of a £10,000 write-off? And yeah, leave it.
Just trying to think.
The machine is crunching numbers at the moment.
Approximately, I'm just going to give you a. Well, in terms of business rates, half of that goes to central government under the business rates scheme. But
I can't hear you. Have you got your mic?
Yes, it's on.
Sorry,
It's on.
it is on.
The computer's in the way.
Could you project?
Sorry. In terms of business rates, under the business rates scheme, we have to give about half of that to central government and 10% to Norfolk County Council, and we have 40%. So it's 40% of that figure is the impact on Breckland.
So in essence, that's £40,000 divided by 4 write-offs, so it's £10,000 a write-off that we've suffered.
Thank you. Councillor Monument.
I was just going to suggest that it might be useful to have the percentage appear in a separate column on those same figures to make it quite clear, without my trying to do sums in my head. I could have picked my phone up and done it that way, I'm sure, to get an idea of the percentage of business rates that was being lost and the percentage of sundry debts that was being lost. I think when you work it out, and it's 0.3 or possibly less.
It is actually just less.
Yeah.
I rounded it up.
Yeah. I rounded several figures trying to work this out. Didn't come out with the same answer, but it doesn't matter. It's clearly way under 0.5, even with my arithmetic. So it's good, and it's good news. I'd like to see it there as a percentage, so that we show that it's good news. And the other comment I wanted to make was, yes, when I tot up what you've got here lost this year compared with last year, it's a reduction of over 50% of the figure last year, so I'm very pleased to see it like that. And I think it would be a good idea if it's reported at least once a year as standard. Once might be enough, but I don't think it should be by exception.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Cowan, for your explanation and clarification. I agree entirely with Councillor Monument's comments about reporting. I think at the very least it should be at least once a year, just on transparency basis. First part of the question is, I'm assuming that in our annual accounts that we sort of publish, that we would put any sort of qualification in there around, as Linda referred to, the percentage accrued. The other side of the equation, I know we do a huge amount to support business in Breckland. I think at the last full council meeting there was a question without notice from Councillor Jeremy, I think regrettably you weren't there, about late payments, etc. So that's a very small part of. I'm not suggesting there's a cause and effect between liquidation of businesses and late payment by us or any other bodies, but it just as the other side of the coin. But I agree with that, and it probably wouldn't be particularly helpful to have that broken down by geography or sector, because that would then breach a number of other issues. Thank you.
So just listening to the members of the committee, I think there is a sort of consensus that we ought to have an annual report. The business rates one, I just wonder, because the financial resilience of people paying business rates is nothing to do with this council. They're not decisions made by this council. So it's just so I wondered if that would be better reported along with council tax arrears or something like that, rather than have equal weight, as it were, with the write-offs for our own commercial and activities where we're responsible for, or if we have debtors to people who owe us. I do agree with Councillor Monument, and I do think that to have the percentage of business rates collected reported along with the average for similar authorities and maybe a national average, so that we've got some context, because some of the figures look very big, but it may be that in terms of percentages we're well ahead of other authorities. And also if there is we are facing increased interest rates and a more challenging business environment, I expect that figure to go up, even though Breckland Council may not be doing anything differently. So I think that I don't want to charge the officers with having to deliver something that's impossible, which is an ever-improving figure in the face of something that the council doesn't have any control over. But I do think that in terms of our own, where we are billing on our own behalf because services or whatever that we receive, that we've received a bad debt for, we perhaps need to have a fuller report. Councillor Monument.
Oh, can we just come back on that one, Chairman?
Yes, of course.
I think Matthew would like to make an observation.
Just in terms of comparison with other authorities, because this is a kind of a bespoke report, most councils wouldn't necessarily, other councils wouldn't necessarily report on write-offs over 10,000 in the way that we're doing. So I think we wouldn't be able to make a sort of comparison nationally, but those are the figures that wouldn't.
Okay.
We'll look at local.
I mean, maybe we could have do they have to report on total business rate collection?
In terms of every council will need to report on total business rates right off the part of their statutory accounts. The total level of business rate write-offs each year is something that every council would have to report. But what they don't have to report is specifically debts over 10,000, which is what this report was.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if we need to include business rates in that then, in the over 10,000, because I think if there's a national reporting percentage that's being reported elsewhere that we can compare ourselves together against, I mean, I looked to the committee to see whether they agree. I would wonder whether business rates need to be included in this report, because as I say, we're not choosing the tenants for business rates. That's being done by independent landlords. We're just having to collect it, and the figure that is much more interesting is how successful we are collecting it as a whole compared to other authorities. So I think in terms of a report, I think I wouldn't necessarily need to see. I don't feel, and I don't know whether the committee agree. I've got Councillor Monument, sorry, and then I'll take you, Robert.
My comment was aimed at something you're just touching on too, that if we have no control over whether people actually pay, we can make sure we pursue it where we can, but we don't have total control over it. I think we can only take partial credit for having succeeded in getting in as much as we have. I think we can say we're pleased to see we've managed to keep it that low, but I don't think that we can take full credit. What I really don't think we should be tempted to say, and the question has been sort of touched on today, is it doesn't matter too much to us because most of the business rate we're giving to somebody else anyway. That really sounds bad.
Yeah.
We have a responsibility to collect it for the government and for Norfolk County Council, etc. So it's important that we do succeed in collecting it from them as well. So I don't think we should ever say, oh, well, we don't mind too much because it's only 40% of it we're losing. I think that sounds a bit bad.
Councillor Cowbird.
I think whilst 40% is what it is, it can be a significant chunk of, for instance, efficiency savings we're looking at for the year. But I think the problem with comparison with other authorities is that there's up to 2 years delay in publishing audited statutory accounts, and you'd be looking at something nearly 3 years old, probably. So I'm not sure what the best form of interfirm comparison is.
Okay, well, I think there's consensus then that when we're looking at this measure, we are less concerned with business rates. In fact, we're not, because they would be reported elsewhere, I think. I think that there would, I think, an annual report on the write-offs that are what we call sundry debts, I think, should be included, and I think an annual report would be useful, and it would be, I think, helpful to have in the report the last 4 years and the current year, so that trends could be looked at. I think that would be really useful. Councillor Cowan.
The green. You're quite right about the business rate reporting, because the ARP performance report, which comes to Council through the joint committee papers, actually identifies the business rate collection rates across all members of ARP and splits those out into each member organisation as well. So that figure is reported, and just for clarity in this meeting, we're ahead of the curve at the moment. The last joint committee meeting on collection of business rates for Breckland, which is good news. So I tend to agree with you there, Chairman, and I'm sure when we get the minutes through, we'll be able to formulate a different approach for this particular report going forward.
And just a quick question to Matthew. When would you like to bring this? When would be the easiest time of year? So it doesn't have to be the anniversary of this meeting. If there is a more convenient time of year, which it would be naturally easier to produce it.
There you go. You're up and running now.
I think it would be either this time of year or at the same time that we give you the draft statement of accounts, because obviously we do have figures in the statement of accounts on write-off, so it kind of, there's a logic to it coming at the same
let's do it
meeting
then,
as that. So that's what we can certainly aim to do that.
Fantastic. Okay. And just before we finish this item, is there anything else that you or Phil want to say before we? So just to recap then, the committee have resolved to... Oh, sorry.
The answer is no, Chair. But it wouldn't let me tell you that.
So just to be clear, the committee has resolved to receive a report on the sundry debts once a year to coincide with the reporting of the accounts when the draft finance and when they're naturally produced. And are you... Yeah. Are you happy to agree to that? So we've got something for the agreed. So that's unanimous, Julie.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much.
You don't mind, I'll
No.
carry on with your business.
Thank you very much. Well, good luck with your meeting. So what I'm going to take now is the annual report on standards arrangements, and I'm going to follow that with item 12, changes to the Constitution, because we have Sarah with us. So if we could then move on to item 8 on your agendas, which is page 14. Sarah Wilson-Hosmai, over to you.
Thank you. So the purpose of the report is to update members on the work undertaken on standards matters and complaints received against district and parish councillors from the 1st of April 2022 to the 31st of March 2023, and the report is for noting. The role of monitoring standards has been delegated to this committee, and the current arrangements for dealing with complaints against members were approved at full council in April 2017. And you will recall that the Members' Code of Conduct has recently been rewritten and was approved at full council on the 23rd of March. And that our independent person is Mr. Bob Davis, who was appointed on the 18th of May 2023 until May 2027. The details of the facts and figures are found on page 15, and the points to note are the percentage of complaints completed within 3 months for the last financial year were 80%. The number of complaints that we had for that period were 18, but we had 2 carried over, so that made 20 that we were dealing with. We had 3 complaints that we considered were not a breach of the Code of Conduct, and by that we mean that we determined that the complaint related to a member who was not acting in their capacity as a member, nor were acting on council business. Of those complaints that were taken forward and were considered further by the monitoring officer, 16 were effectively considered to be no further action, i.e. no breach of the Code of Conduct, which therefore meant that we did not have to consider any investigation or take any of them further. I will take any questions.
Thank you very much. So I've got Councillor Kyber and then Councillor Clark.
Presumably these are aggregate figures for complaints against town and district councillors.
They are indeed.
Are we allowed to know the numbers for the district as opposed to the parishes?
You are, and I did write down the number, but I can't actually find the figure. But I can tell you for this year, so from January to now, we have 14 complaints and 9 involve parishes. And it was a similar percentage for the last financial year. But apologies, I cannot lay my hands on the actual figure. But I can confirm if you would like me to in due course.
Chairman, I think it would be useful if that was an integral part of how the numbers are presented.
Okay. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Great minds. Councillor Kybird has largely preempted my question, so it would be very helpful to have that broken down so that it's not looking, there are X number of complaints against Breckland as district councillors who may be sometimes operating, depends on whether they're 1 or 2 triple hatters, maybe acting in their capacity as a parish councillor, etc. It's up to, I merely throw the question open to the committee as to whether where complaints are made where someone may be making multiple complaints, and I think the term is used is vexatious. I wouldn't be suggesting we have a geographical breakdown or by type, but also where if you had a situation where, which I'm sure is extremely unusual, where a member may be the subject of more than one complaint, you know, from more than one different source. Obviously, it's gratifying to see that only, you know, of the 16, they didn't merit further, you know, further consideration. But thank you for your report. Thank you.
So yes, a couple of things. I do agree. I think it would be interesting to know the number of complainants. So if we've got one person making a lot of complaints, I think that would be useful for the report. I think it would be useful to know how many complaints have been made against Breckland members as in their capacity as a Breckland member. So not in their capacity as maybe a member of a town council or something. And I think that would be useful. But I'd also like to say that the number of complaints made doesn't necessarily reflect on anything if they are found to be without foundation. It's it's gratifying to see that the responses in the report. So if we were to pick those up for the next report, for the format going forward, would that be something that you'd be happy to do?
Yes, perfectly happy to do that.
Fantastic. And does that answer your questions, members? Great. Well, we're happy to note the report in that case. Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll now move on to item 12, which is on changes to the Constitution, which is page 66 of your agendas.
Thank you,
And
Chair.
we're still with you, Sarah.
Thank you. The Council's current constitution was approved in January 2016, and it sits with full council to approve amendments unless, as listed in the report, they are, for example, a minor variation. The details of the amendments proposed are found in Appendix A, and I would like to point out that there's a typo under Amendment 5. My alphabet went a bit awry, but obviously I will correct that in the report that goes to the full council. The amendments are basically amending a reference in the glossary of terms to include the Deputy Chief Executive as Director, to confirm who the Data Protection Officer is, which will basically be the Senior Legal Officer, i.e. myself, to confirm that the Vice Chair is elected rather than appointed. There's always been an anomaly there, and we'd like to correct that anomaly, so both are elected. The next amendment is to give the Chair the discretion to determine the length of the full council meeting, and it's recommended that the meeting should, in normal circumstances, be no longer than 2 hours, which is standard across a lot of the districts in Norfolk. Standing Order 5 and the amendment to that is basically just a tidying up exercise and to hopefully make it easier to understand. So we've merged two paragraphs into one. And finally, the amendment regarding Standing Order number 7 is just for clarification and also to hopefully, if a member or a cabinet member cannot answer the question, or the leader is unable to answer the question, that they can call upon the relevant officer to assist. I can go through all of them in more detail if you'd like me to, but
I think that's really helpful that we've had. Thank you very much for that. I'm looking to the committee. Councillor Clark.
Thank you very much for the report. Yes, I've read the report. That's very helpful, some of the tidying up. Just got only a couple of questions for you, please, here. In the actual report, 2.1.6, referring to Standing Order number 7, you've mentioned there that questions should only be asked that relate to council powers or duties which affect the district. Obviously, that's completely understandable. I'm just trying to think of a situation in which bodies which are not part of the council, but which, I'm not talking about national government, it might be, say, the county council is doing something which impinges on our performance or ability to discharge our powers or duties, and that therefore wouldn't be ruled out of order as a question without notice going forward. That's my first part of the question. I agree with you entirely about the scheduling of the meetings to not normally being longer than 2 hours, and if it was intended there would be some sort of special meeting or special exemption, would there also be a power for the chairman to, if it was agreed by a motion of the council to suspend standing orders, to allow it in exceptional circumstances to go beyond that by a defined period? So, for example, it might be, we said, because of particular lengths of time, which would obviously be scheduled on the agenda, we could say, right, we now need to move the motion that we have an additional, 30 minutes rather than coming back for a special meeting. Obviously, going by my past experience, that would be exceptional, but those are just my two areas I want to flag up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I think in respect of the first matter, yes, I think if it's anything that affects the district or even probably the county, then yes, I consider that would be appropriate to answer that question. And obviously the chairman always has the discretion of whether or not to allow questions without notice or the actual question. In terms of the length of the actual meetings, you will see the actual wording is in normal circumstances it won't be longer than 2 hours, so it's entirely a matter for the chair. So if you were the matter, I don't know, the hearing, the council meeting was say 2 hours and you thought, well, actually we've only got another 10 minutes, then that would be perfectly acceptable. But I think it was just a flag that really 2 hours is probably enough for most people's concentration, and to give there a bit of some discretion to the chair, obviously with consultation of the members present as to what should happen, should we adjourn it or whatever once we reach that notional limit.
Thank you for that. Just to make clear, I was not pushing for going beyond 2 hours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kybert.
Just for clarification, this 2 hour limit, does that apply to all meetings of committees as well?
This is purely for full council.
And not directly related to this agenda item, but I happen to be a member of 4 joint committees with the County Council, which is the area museums, the joint museums, Norfolk Records and Health Scrutiny, whose standing orders take precedence on those meetings.
That's like a bit like a question without notice, isn't it? I think we could probably...
That's fine.
Right, okay, well, you're happy to pick that up?
Yes.
Right, okay. Brilliant. Okay, well, members of the committee, we've considered it. I think we're asked, let me just check the recommendation.
To
right, so we're asked to... we're agreed, so we are agreed, and the Constitution be amending accordingly. So, is this a minor amendment and such within the power of this committee, or is this a major amendment? Does this have to go to full council?
This will have to go to full council.
So the recommendation should be that we recommend to full council, and that's not the recommendation on the report. So we need to amend it. So if we could agree that we agree the proposed recommendations and we recommend to full council. Yeah. Are we in favour? Yeah, unanimous. So thank you very much. Okay.
Chairman, no doubt might be further debated, and we have to tell people to come to this meeting if they want to debate detail.
Exactly. Very happy to say that, Councillor Kybert. Okay, so we're now moving to item 9, where Ryan has set very quietly. So thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry it's taken time to get to. Councillor Webb, thank you very much for your indulgence. Do you want to introduce the item, Councillor Webb?
Yes, please. Right, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Chairman. I'm pleased to present to you today the Q2 strategic risks. This has been a static period for the Council, with the risk scores not changing majorly since the committee saw them last in June. That is not to say that work is not being done to mitigate them, but that the work is not yet at a stage where it has an impact to bring the risk down. In some cases, the situation around risks remains very fluid. For example, changes to nutrient neutrality over the last few weeks has meant that the situation around the scoring of this risk has been discussed at length. One notable change to the risk relates to strategic contracts, where the score has changed. The reasoning to justify the change in this score can be found within the appendix. Myself and Ryan will be happy to take any questions from the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. Ryan Pack, do you have anything you would like to?
Yeah, Dave Fowler sent an email on the basis that he couldn't be here today, just asking some questions about this risk report. So I'll just go through those now, so they're obviously minuted. So the first one was around the waste consultation risk, around the government announcement. That's going to be October 25. Realistically, what we'll look at with that risk is that will come down to, there's obviously LGA resource around waste consultation. We need to understand what the plan of the LGA is before we bring that risk down, just because that resource is there around burdens funding, and if we're going to have to do work way in advance of 2025, that risk probably needs to stay at that level. If not, we can look at lowering the likelihood, but the impact's most likely going to be the same. The other one was around the emerging government policy one, and just reference to the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, which we're happy to add in. There's a wider discussion which we're going to have internally before, I think we come back in December, around the emerging policy risk and how we might deal with that moving forward, just because the last two major bits of emerging government policy we've dealt with separately as individual risks. So it's a question of, is the emerging government policy risk still right, or do we just need to deal with policies as of when they come moving forward? Slightly similar conversation we'll have around the sustainability strategy. That was obviously a standalone piece. That's now been put into the 2035 corporate plan work stream. So it's whether we look at a wider corporate risk around the corporate plan now, or whether that's something we'd look to do when we refresh that corporate plan in sort of the next 12 to 18 months, I believe. Obviously, have to take any questions from anyone on the committee.
Councillor Guybird and then Councillor Clark.
Yes, thanks, Ryan. Page 11, the medium-term financial plan. You've got last reviewed 3rd of July and next review 1st of June gone. Presumably that review needs to sort of take place, roughly speaking, as soon as you know what the government funding settlement is. But I think the target date should reflect that kind of timetable.
Let me just get up on my screen. You're right. I'm just double checking what we put for the timescale on that one. Apologies. There we go. Medium-term financial plan. So yeah, the next review date would be the 1st of October. That would be the start of the quarter. We'd put a review in for that. So obviously, that's in the next few days. In terms of that target date, with the medium-term financial plan, it's always going to be a strategic risk to us. So what we do is an exercise every April where we look at all our strategic risks and go, is that going to be a risk for the next 12 months? So likely what we do with this risk next year when we reach that target date is extend it to a 2025 one, unless there'd been, like I say, any major changes around funding or anything, which meant this was no longer a strategic risk to the organisation.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Question for Councillor Webb and or Ryan. Is going through the risk register, I'm very pleased to note on Q2 there that the first time in a while the housing team is up to full strength. So I note that. In the last line there on the first page, it talks about a temporary expansion of the team to deal with the increased demand. So my first question is that going to be kept under review, whether that might need to be, consolidated, that particular post or posts? And the second point is obviously around the other pressure, which we're all aware of, which is the cost of rising temporary accommodation. And I know you've got plans in there to look at private sector leasing, etc., and bring down those costs. So I'm wondering when we would expect a report, either Cabinet, Council, or back here, in terms of how that's progressing, because that is obviously going to help enormously, both on the cost but also the additional pressures on from the portfolio holder downwards to the actual housing team. So I understand that the pressures on the individuals and the team. Thank you.
So I'll deal with the first one around the makeup of the housing team. So my understanding would be some of that temporary resource would be fixed term contracts, at which point we review based on what we're seeing into the housing service. Temporary accommodation, the numbers in are still going up. So realistically, that's a conversation which will happen far down the line. But it's about making sure that you have a housing team that you can deal with both the preventative and the relief cases as of when they come in. So it's, do you front end it? Do you sort of put more in the back end? So that's certainly a conversation that can be had down the line as to how that sort of breaks down once we've seen those numbers come down. In terms of the temporary accommodation and the private sector point, I don't know. I'll pass over to Councillor Webb then.
Okay, so I can help with that. Actually, I spoke to the portfolio holder this morning about it, and she's basically having a meeting with her team to discuss this. We're not at the stage where there's anything to report, but we are working on every option possible to try and solve the temporary accommodation challenge, which we all know we've got. So, as I said, there will be information coming back in the next few weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. On that particular risk, actually, we haven't got anything about government policy, because part of the reason that the number of people are not finding temporary accommodation is because there is less private rented accommodation available out there, and that's why people are coming to us, and that's because landlords are withdrawing from the private rental sector, and there's therefore less supply. So I just wonder if one of the mitigations ought to be some sort of lobbying or request for government policy to increase the private rental supply, which would in turn reduce the pressure on the council. It's not in the mitigation, and I just wonder if it's something that should be considered.
Can I just answer that? I think you've got a very valid point there, and I do understand the implications of the recent changes by government. So I will be talking to the portfolio holder about looking at including that in the mitigation side of things.
Thank you. Councillor Kyburd.
No, I take your point entirely. I mean, I think there are a number of factors causing landlords to withdraw from the market. One is interest rates. Two is the fact they're not tax deductible. 3 was impending legislation on insulation. Absolutely. And 4 was tenancy arrangements. Mm-hmm. And those 4 coming together is kind of a perfect storm that people are just jumping out of that market. Mm. That has a knock-on effect on the housing market because there's more second-hand houses coming on and therefore less new ones being sold.
No, I absolutely.
No, I was just looking at Appendix C, the risk appetite statement, which has an interesting cosmology called the universe of risks. But no, my question really on that was, it focuses on risk appetite, but how is that conveyed to from top management to middle management, and how is it managed? Thank you.
So, yeah, risk appetite is one of the more confusing elements, I admit, of the risk management policy. It's one we've added in the last few years, and it's essentially to make sense in terms of, as an organisation, you have capacity. If you want to increase that capacity to deal with more risk, then that has funding, legislative implications. It's about what we're comfortable dealing with at risk and what we're not. So in terms of how that goes out to the different levels of management, The universal, the risk appetite's agreed annually with CMT. I think we're going to talk about the policy in a bit, but realistically what we'll do is add an addendum to the Q1 report each year for you guys, say this is the new appetite that's been agreed, this is what we want to take forwards. In terms of the senior managers, we do risk training every 12 months with any new managers who come in to essentially explain concepts like this, just to make sure everyone's comfortable with it. But by and large, with the strategic risks, they're the ones which I would work specifically with managers on. The universe of risk stuff is more applied at senior manager level when they do the operational risks, where they have sort of more freedom with updates. But there is a training programme in place. I'm obviously happy to explain the universe of risk a bit further. If that's useful to anyone, either in this committee, via email, or outside, I'm sort of happy to do that.
I'm just picking up Councillor Khyber's point. It was more about how, so fine, we agree at a senior level, but how does that manifest itself in the way the council changes its behaviour? Is that where you would go? Yes. So is it through policy from the senior management team, or how would you know, if an appetite for risk changes, is there training? How do the people dealing with that risk, how do they become aware of the changes in the risk appetite?
So that would be something we'd communicate out to people. Like I said, the appetite we agree annually, and if you go down to the one just below it, around what's it called, the risk appetite matrix, where basically we say if it's this score, the council commits to bringing it down, the council commits to watching it, stuff like that. Like I said, ultimately annually we agree that as to what the council's tolerance is around those risks and those scores, and then that would get communicated out to managers in that if you're scoring a risk at this level, that means we have to do these things in order to bring it down, or if you're scoring at this level, that means we'll just watch it for the moment. But does that answer your question?
Okay, so this is part of the... go on, Robert.
Yeah, I mean, if it's sort of any reassessment is attached to the Q1 report, I think we probably need to look at that in a little bit more detail than we have done in the past to understand what internal process has gone on and whether there's a significant change of direction.
Okay, so you're saying we'd want to understand the policy that's driving the change in the risk appetite.
So I'm happy to bring it as a separate item in the Q1 report if that's easier moving forwards. I think realistically, the council's appetite around risk isn't going to massively change, which is sort of linked into what we'll talk about in the policy one in a sec. This bit can change annually, and we probably need to refresh that annually to make sure it's still aligned with the council's direction. But realistically, the council isn't going to become more or less risk averse unless there's sort of major changes or stuff like that. I think this will sort of broadly stay the same, but for the purposes of good governance, I think we need to agree it annually, but happy to bring it as a separate item in Q1 if that's easier, as opposed to just an appendix to the risk report.
Would you be happier with that? Okay. Any other comments? No? Okay, well, thank you very much for that. I think we'll move on to the policy that you would, the next report, which you've already mentioned, Ryan, which is the risk management policy on page 44, and in particular the appendix with the actual policy written on it, the framework which doesn't start until page 47.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm pleased to present to you today the revised risk management framework. The framework sets out how the council manages risk and risk appetite, and this was last refreshed in 2021. Overall, much of the framework remains the same. This is largely as a result of the council's risk position and risk management best practice remaining the same. Other changes are, we have better linked risk appetite into this document, and it shows a clear process of how we practically assess and manage risks. We have also included changes to the council staffing and internal board structure, as well as some of simplification of risk structures, which I found very useful. The recommendation is to approve the revised document and to review it again in 30 months, which is 2.5 years' time. And Ryan, as our expert on risk, is here to answer any questions.
I'll just come in with a couple of points, if that's all right. So one was a question again from David Fowler regarding 3.1 around audit best practice and can we evidence that. we're currently going for an audit at the moment with them, but we have raised the risk policy with them. By and large, nothing's changed since 2021, where we did discuss this at a lot more length with them, and this was seen as best practice back then. The principles of risk management ultimately haven't changed that much since that time, so we're still pretty confident that this is still best practice from an audit perspective based on those conversations. The second point is just within the review section of the policy itself, it talks around a 24-month review of this. What we're going for is actually a 30-month one. That was, as you can imagine, one of the various ones we looked at, so we will alter that depending on what you guys agree with based on the recommendations of either keeping it 18 months or moving it to that 30-month one. The only other change we will make is based on that conversation we've just had around the Q1 appetite. We'll put that in as a separate bit to review, that gets brought to you guys annually as a separate item, just so that's sort of in stone for everyone. But obviously have to take any questions around the policy.
Thank you, members. Councillor Kybird?
Yeah, can we go to page 52 and what I would call the systems diagram? There's the blue thing with
Boxes.
upward arrows. Now, what that doesn't include in that information flow is the quarterly risk reports going both here and to scrutiny.
Yeah, I'm happy to add that in if that's clearer. We talk about later in the document, but I agree it could be. Well, we talk about the audit committee at the top one, but I'm happy to make an addendum to that we talk about the report.
Yeah, I mean the suggestion from the diagram is we as an audit committee have to rely on internal audit to understand what might be going right or wrong, and I think that doesn't reflect the reality of what we actually do.
Okay. Do you want to just...
I'm happy to amend the diagram.
Fine.
I think that makes perfect sense, so I'm happy to make that change.
Councillor Monument.
I'm just wondering about 30 months as an idea. I've never been asked to review something at 2.5 yearly intervals. It's going to take it 6 months out from now, next time, and then back again. And I don't know how well that fits into the annual programme. This may be a good quiet time to do it, and 6 months away from it may just add the burden to an already very busy period, because I think our programmes do vary considerably from one end of the year to the other. The other thing is that then puts it onto a 5-year rolling programme of 2 meetings take 5 years, which sounds quite a long time to me. I wonder whether the 24 months was a better option.
So I'm comfortable with those suggestions, provided the committee are happy with them as well. Ultimately, what we're looking at with this is currently it's on an 18-month cycle, and what we sort of found from when we did it in 2021 up till now is that nothing's really changing it within the policy. So to bring it back every 18 months for something like risk, where it's important that we have consistency of approach, like I said, some of these risks on the register are very long-term risks we're looking at. What we want to do was we thought, well, it's 1.5 years, let's do it 2.5 years instead. I agree with your points, however, so if the committee wants to look at 18, 24 or 30 months, I'm sort of comfortable with any of those options based on what the committee decides is how they want to approach it.
Okay, well, I mean, there's a proposal for 24 months, which would bring it back to this meeting, the anniversary of this meeting, which seems like a sensible meeting for it. If the officers are happy with that, then I propose that we bring it back every 2 years to this meeting. So it seems like a good time. So you do get your extra 6 months. So we did take that on board.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything more on the risk policy framework? No. Okay. Well, thank you both very much for your attendance. Sorry, I thought we had. So, that the Governance and Audit Committee approve the revised risk management framework and will agree to the next review being in 24 months' time. All in favour? Agreed. Right, that's unanimous. Okay, well that leaves us with the work programme on page 72 of your agendas. Members, any comments? Officers? No? Well, I think that looks fairly clear. I'm happy with it, so thank you very much indeed, and I will now formally close the meeting. Thank you very much.